Good afternoon, everyone. This is going to be a bit of a different video because I don't want to talk about electronics or even my daughter's painting project, which was also done on this mat the other day. I want to talk about this. And really, I don't want to talk about this, although I'll talk about this. What I really want to talk about is how to approach repair videos. Because if you look at my hand, you can see that the repair, putting this in, involved, well, squeezing up next to some sharp metal, and although in principle very straightforward, ended up being a bit more of a pain than one would expect. And certainly what one would expect from looking at the many YouTube videos about replacing this part. And this part is the motor coupler from a Maytag or Frigidaire or any one of those American brands washing machine. And if you listen in the background, you can hear that mine's running in the background because, yes, I replaced this part. All this part does is it goes between the motor on one side. It's symmetrical. And it sits between the motor and the gearbox and allows there to be some play between the motor's alignment, right? These can move like that between the motor's alignment and the gearbox's alignment. And you can see what happened on a 20-year-old washer is that eventually the plastic, I'd have thought nylon, but honestly it doesn't feel like it. Looks like it, but doesn't feel like it, has shattered right there. And so it needed to be replaced. And this is, I think I paid $12 and change Canadian, so it's a $10 US part, essentially, right? So no major cost. The rubber or urethane interface is looking like it's starting to wear, but was still good. It's the plastic that went. Okay, so what about this? This is easy to replace, apart from the motor being fairly heavy. There's nothing in principle that looks terribly difficult about that. But the problem is that they're on top of the motor. So this is the top of the motor. So you have a motor shaft at both ends, right? One of which connects to this thing. So we'll kind of mount that there. There's the other part of it, and then, you've got the bits and pieces and this rubber piece into, and then you've got a plate like that that mounts it to the transmission, which then, I don't know, it's a weirdly shaped thing because it's got a gear train in it. All of those parts, by the way, seem to be aware. And on this side you have the water pump, which is a plastic gizmo, and it's held on with a couple of spring clips like that, one at the top and one at the bottom that hold it in place. And this motor is held to this backing plate by a couple of spring clips retained by some small screws. But the screws aren't really necessary, and I understand some models don't have it. So does that make sense? So this is the motor, plate, transmission. And at the back of the transmission you have another shaft that now goes vertically, has, I think that's where the brake is, and then that connects to the tub and up into the washer. So fairly straightforward. Now, on every video I saw, and I saw 2 or 3 or 4 of these about how to put this together, this was straightforward to remove. That looked easy. The motor was easy to remove. The concentration of the hard part was supposed to be aligning these as you were sliding everything back together. And that's true. That was comparatively difficult. But that wasn't the problem I had. It was easy enough to get the bottom clip in place, but the top clip, especially on my small apartment-style washer where you couldn't remove the whole front of it, was almost impossible to get over. And eventually what I did is I put a clamp between there, and I didn't have a large enough one, so I clipped it to, probably a bad idea, to what's essentially the motor, right? And so see, clamp there, and forced this down, and then was able to put a small screwdriver in this hole and use that to force the clip down. But it took me an hour and a half. This was in a relatively constrained spot because, as I said, on the apartment-sized washer you can only remove the front, you can't remove the sides. So this whole thing is sitting in the corner over here, right? If you're looking at the front of the washer, the side's still on, you can only get the front out, so you're underneath that, and there's not much room to work with, so naturally I scratched myself up on the bits and pieces of things. Okay. Every single video I did either told you nothing about the difficulty of putting this plate in, or one relatively seasoned repair person said, well, I use a pair of channel locks to force it into place. This thing is an absolute bear, especially if you're stuck in a corner. And you can hear spin cycles working just fine on it now. This thing is an absolute bear. And if I'd known how bad it was, I could have thought about how I was going to approach that problem. But since I didn't, I was sitting there with the thing half disassembled and trying to find something to prop the motor up with. So I pledge to you in any video that I do that I am going to tell you what the hard part is, where I found the biggest sticking point in my terribly amateur attempts to repair any electronics, or if I ever do a video on something mechanical like that. Because what I find is the vast majority of repair videos gloss over the hard part. With one massive exception, the car guys only tell you about the hard part. They know that they're speaking to people who have some experience, and they're going to, you're going to get a suggestion about maybe you want to invest in, a 10-inch C-clamp to try to get that thing back in phase. Remember, this motor weighs 10 pounds or so, right? So doing this in a corner is a bit of a mess. So my pledge to you, and I hope everybody else who does repair videos or whatever, whether they're rank amateurs like me or people who actually know what they're doing, tell us what the hard part is and tell us how you get around the hard part, and alternatives that might help someone like me get around the hard part. I'm only a 160-pound gorilla. Maybe a 200-pound gorilla could force that thing on there, but I certainly couldn't. All right. Rant finished. Hopefully you have a good afternoon.